She thought she had won. Camilla, the woman who had silently endured decades under the condescending gaze of an entire monarchy, had finally touched the crown she had longed for half her life. But what she didn't know was that her most triumphant moment would mark the beginning of a silent verdict, written not by court, but by fate itself. A forgotten box, a bundle of letters from the past weathered by time, and a secret buried for 70 years powerful enough to shake the very foundations of the throne. William didn't just rise to challenge Camilla, he stood to protect something far more sacred, the dignity of a father being manipulated through a pain no one had ever dared to name. Charles, the man who wore the crown but never once got to live as a man. Camilla, the woman who never knew when to stop. William had stayed silent for far too long. And this time the answer he gave Camilla wasn't just an accusation, it was a final judgment, one that would leave her permanently voiceless in the royal halls. What Camilla never saw coming was that the one person she thought would never abandon her would be the first to walk away. When the curtain of the past is finally lifted, who will be the one left with nothing at all? In the days following Queen Elizabeth II's death, Balmoral Castle was cloaked in an indescribable melancholy, as if the very walls mourned the monarch who had reigned for over 7 decades. Gone were her sharp glances and commanding presence, replaced by a heavy silence that enveloped the castle. Camilla, now officially queen consort, stepped into Elizabeth's old office with the air of a victor. To her, this wasn't just a room, it was a symbol of the supreme power she had waited years to touch. But fate, with its cruel sense of humor, had placed a secret before her, one with the power to shake the monarchy to its core. Camilla paused before an ancient oak cabinet, her eyes tracing the dust-covered surface, sensing something hidden within. A strange premonition slowed her steps, as if the past were whispering her name. In a shadowed corner of the cabinet, she discovered a small wooden box, its rusted lock forgotten by time. With curiosity tinged with suspicion, she lifted the lid, the hinges creaking softly as if issuing a warning from another realm. Inside was a bundle of handwritten letters, yellowed pages tied with a faded red ribbon. The elegant script of Queen Elizabeth II stood out sharp and authoritative, as if the Queen herself were still present, staring at Camilla from beyond eternity. The letters were addressed to Sir Godfrey Elmsworth, a royal therapist, a name even Camilla, with all her cunning, had never encountered in any records. The mystery quickened her pulse as if she were about to touch something forbidden. Camilla sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the first letter. Elizabeth's words were cold but incisive, written by a woman who had learned to suppress all emotion. To protect the monarchy, Charles has serious emotional issues. From a young age, he did not know how to love, and I had to hide that, or no one would accept him as heir. I did everything to protect the throne, but sometimes I wonder if I was protecting my son or merely the monarchy. Camilla's breath caught in her throat. Each line was a dagger piercing the perfect facade of the royal family, exposing cracks no one dared touch. A king with a history of psychological trauma, a boy who grew up unable to love, acknowledged by his own mother as a flaw to be concealed. If this truth were exposed, the public would no longer see Charles as a noble monarch, but as a frail man, a patient hidden behind a crown. Camilla's eyes gleamed with a dangerous spark, like a hunter spotting the rarest prey. She turned the pages, each line revealing a darker secret. Elizabeth wrote of secret therapy sessions for Charles, her fear that if the truth came out, the monarchy would crumble. One passage stopped Camilla. Cold Philip wanted Charles to be strong, but I fear we damaged him more than we helped. I chose the throne over my son, and that may have been my greatest mistake. The confession from a queen renowned for her resolve made Camilla realize the terrifying power of this secret. It wasn't just a personal story, it was a weapon capable of destroying the royal image, toppling Charles's position, and paving the way for Camilla to solidify her own power. Camilla folded the letters, her hands gripping tightly, lips pressed into a thin line. In her mind, a plan began to take shape, like a chessboard set with ruthless moves. This was no mere secret, it was the sharpest blade capable of controlling Charles, subduing any rival, and above all reining in Kate, who was increasingly winning the public's heart, threatening Camilla's position. She stood, her eyes cold but burning with resolve. She tucked the letters back into the box but left it unlocked, as if keeping it ready for use at any moment. As she left the room, Camilla felt a new surge of power coursing through her veins. She knew she had opened a door into the darkness of the royal family, a door she would step through without hesitation. But unbeknownst to her, within the palace walls, another storm was quietly brewing. William Charles's son, with his love for his father and loyalty to his family, would not let her schemes destroy what he held dear. The secret Camilla held, however powerful, was only the beginning of a bloodless palace war, where loyalty, love, and honor would determine the fate of the monarchy. The frigid night at Clarence House wasn't just from the October wind howling through the ancient stained glass windows, but from the suffocating tension in the opulent library. The flickering light of the fireplace cast dancing shadows across Camilla's face, highlighting her cold, calculating smile, one devoid of warmth radiating only menace. She sat on a silk-upholstered chair, hands clasped tightly, her crimson-painted nails glinting in the firelight. Before her, Charles sat motionless in a crimson velvet armchair, his sunken eyes lost in an invisible abyss. On the ebony table between them lay Queen Elizabeth II's handwritten letters, a silent accusation, each page carrying the weight of an entire dynasty. Camilla leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Charles sharp as if peeling away every layer of armor he had built over 7 decades. "Do you think I don't see it?" she began, her voice slow, each word a razor slicing through the stillness. "The public is calling Kate the Princess of Hearts, just as they once called Diana. She's everywhere, Charles. Perfect smiles, emotional speeches, embraces for the crowds. She's stealing your spotlight, and mine." Her words were poisoned arrows aimed at the deepest insecurities buried in Charles's heart. Charles didn't respond. His hands gripped the armrest's knuckles, whitening as if struggling to anchor himself against the emotional storm Camilla was unleashing. His eyes avoided the letters on the table, but their presence weighed on his mind like a specter. His mother's words, the secrets of his own soul, now lay in the hands of the wife he once trusted. His silence only fueled Camilla's confidence. She rose, pacing the room slowly, each step like a predator circling its prey. Her black silk dress clung to her frame, the rustle of fabric blending with the crackle of the fire, creating a menacing melody. She stopped by the table, resting a hand on the letters, her fingers grazing the yellowed pages as if caressing a prized weapon. "Just one leak from these letters," she continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "and the public will start to question. Is a king who needed therapy from childhood, who his own mother admitted didn't know how to love, worthy of the throne? They won't see a King Charles. They'll see a patient, a weak man hidden behind a royal facade." Her words twisted into the scars Charles had buried his entire life, making him flinch, though his face remained stoically calm. Charles looked up, his eyes raw with pain, as if each of Camilla's words reopened old wounds. "What do you want, Camilla?" he asked, his voice hoarse, each word costing a piece of his soul. He had never defied her, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how. The years of emotional suppression at Gordonstoun, the harsh lessons from his father, Prince Philip, had molded Charles into a man who bowed before stronger tides. And Camilla, with her cunning and ruthlessness, knew it well. Camilla smiled, but it was a smile as cold as ice, devoid of mercy. She sat across from Charles, her eyes never leaving him, as if gauging the extent of his surrender. "Pull Kate from the spring festival," she said, her voice even, but commanding, in order not to be defied. "Limit her presence. No more heartfelt speeches, no more radiant photos on the front pages. Don't let her keep shining, stealing the spotlight you and I spent years building. Or don't blame me, Charles." Her threat needed no elaboration. The power of the letters was enough to make Charles understand the consequences of defiance. She stood locking eyes with Charles for a moment longer, ensuring his complete submission. Charles said nothing, his head bowed, hands limp on the armrests, as if all strength had been drained from him. The firelight illuminated his face, etching the deep lines of a lifetime of suffering. Camilla turned, her heels clicking on the wooden floor like hammer blows sealing Charles's fate. The door closed behind her with a sharp click, leaving him alone in the darkness, facing the painful memories he had tried to bury for decades. But what Camilla didn't know was that in the shadows of Clarence House another storm was brewing. William, the heir to the throne, had heard everything. He stood in the hallway, fists clenched, heart ablaze with rage and resolve. Camilla might think she held ultimate power, but she had underestimated the love of a son for his father and the loyalty of a husband for his wife. William would not let her schemes destroy his family. In his heart, a plan was forming, not a war of blood, but one of intellect and honor to protect what he cherished most. William stood motionless in the long hallway of Clarence House, his heart gripped by the venomous words Camilla had just spoken through the half-open door. Her heels faded into the distance, leaving a heavy silence, but within William a storm of emotions raged. He had just returned from Sandringham, exhausted from tense meetings with royal advisors, but nothing could have prepared him for what he'd overheard. Camilla's threats, sharp, ruthless, aimed at his father, and Kate pierced his chest like a dagger, igniting a mix of fury and pain. Camilla had spoken of the letters of Charles's wounded past, of her readiness to expose that secret to control Kate. The woman William loved more than life, the mother of his children and a symbol of hope for a generation. Each word was a declaration of war, not just against Charles, but against the future of the monarchy. William clenched his fists, his breathing heavy, as if the air in the hallway had turned to lead. He pressed himself against the cold wall, trying to quell the rising tide of anger. But his heart couldn't bear the thought of his father, a king, being manipulated by Camilla's cruelty. Unable to stand still any longer, William pushed open the door to the library. The firelight flickered across Charles's face, still seated motionless in the velvet armchair, his hands cradling his forehead, as if shielding himself from the world. On the ebony table, Queen Elizabeth II's letters lay silently, haunting his mind. Charles looked up at the sound of footsteps, his sunken eyes filled with pain, as if he knew his secret was no longer his own. "I heard everything Father William said," his voice low but trembling with emotion, each word costing a piece of his heart. "Camilla, she's using those letters to threaten you, isn't she? She wants you to dim Kate's light just to protect her own power." He stepped closer, his eyes locked on Charles's haggard face, searching for an explanation, a glimmer of hope that his father wouldn't surrender. Charles took a deep breath, his hands trembling on the armrests. "Will," he whispered, his voice hoarse, as if each word drew blood. "Those letters, they're true. I had emotional issues as a child. I didn't know how to love because I was never loved properly." The confession stabbed William's heart, yet it painted a clearer picture of his father's painful life, a man stifled by duty, wounded by those closest to him. William knelt beside his father, placing a hand on his shoulder, feeling Charles's frail frame tremble beneath his vest. "You don't have to face this alone," he said, his voice firm but filled with love. "Camilla has no right to use your past to manipulate you, to hurt Kate, to destroy our family. You're the king, but first you're my father, and I won't let her do this." Charles looked at his son, his eyes brimming with tears. "I don't know what to do, Will," he said, his voice choking. "Camilla, she knows how to make me feel unworthy. I've always feared I'm a failed king, a failed father." The confession tore through the armor Charles had worn his entire life, revealing a fragile man torn by scars from his past. William gripped his father's shoulder, his eyes blazing with resolve. "You're not a failure," he said, his voice steady as a vow. "You've carried the crown your whole life, endured what no one else could. But from now on, I'll stand by you. Camilla won't win." He stood, his tall frame exuding the presence of an heir ready to fight for his family. In his heart, rage and love intertwined, forging an ironclad determination to confront Camilla's schemes. Charles watched his son, a faint spark of hope flickering in his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. William left the room, his heart burning with fury and loyalty. Camilla might think she held ultimate power, but she had underestimated the strength of a son protecting his father and a husband defending his wife. This war, though yet to begin, was destined to be fought not with blood, but with honor and truth. In the days following the tense confrontation at Clarence House, Charles retreated into solitude, as if trying to escape Camilla's threats and the weight of the secret she had exposed. He sat alone in his private room at the palace, where the dim light of an old brass desk lamp illuminated his weathered face, etching lines like a map of a life filled with turmoil. Each crease seemed to tell a story of duty, sacrifice, and unhealed wounds. Every night, as darkness enveloped the palace, Memories of the past resurfaced, pulling him back to his years at Gordonstoun, the harsh school Prince Philip his father had chosen to forge him into a man worthy of the throne, but which instead left scars that never faded. Charles recalled a stormy night when he was just 13, a memory that still made him shudder. The tempest roared outside wind, whistling through the dormitory's cracks, carrying icy rain that seeped through an unclosed window. His thin mattress was soaked, turning sleep into torment. With trembling hands, Charles tried to push his bed away from the window to escape the rain, but the dormitory prefect, a burly teenager with cruel eyes, caught him. "Put it back, you weakling," the boy barked, his voice echoing in the dark room like an unforgiving verdict. Terrified and helpless, Charles dragged the bed back, lying on the cold, wet mattress, his body curled against the bone-chilling cold. His heart sank with humiliation, the sense that no one cared, no one protected him. As a prince, his weakness only invited mockery, becoming a jest for those around him. The next day, the nightmare continued on the muddy sports field after the rain. Charles, slight and clumsy, was deliberately pushed into a puddle by a group of classmates. Mud clung to his uniform, seeping into his skin, cold and filthy. Laughter erupted from the crowd, each jeer a blade slicing into his young heart. "Get up, the Queen's pampered boy," one shouted, dripping with contempt. Charles' hands, caked with mud, struggled to stand, his knees trembling, tears welling in his eyes. He bit his lip, holding them back, because at Gordonstoun, tears were a sign of failure. And as a prince, his failure was magnified, turned into sport for others. He stood silently, wiping mud from his face, but inside a piece of his soul shattered. His uncle, Lord Mountbatten, was a rare light in those dark days. During one visit, he found Charles huddled in a corner of the dormitory, his eyes vacant, as if he had lost himself. With patience and kindness, Mountbatten sat beside him, listening as Charles poured out his pain, the nights on a wet bed, mornings woken by buckets of cold water, the relentless taunts for daring to show a fragile heart. Charles spoke of his loneliness, of feeling abandoned by his parents, of silently wishing for his mother's embrace, only to be met with cold silence from the palace. Mountbatten, softer than Philip, held the boy close, promising to do something to change things. Mountbatten returned and told Queen Elizabeth II everything, hoping to awaken her maternal instincts. Elizabeth, though a queen, felt her son's pain. As a mother, she confronted her husband, her voice trembling with anger and heartache. "Bring Charles home, Philip. He can't go on like this." But Philip, hardened by war and unyielding, refused. "Raising Charles is my responsibility," he said, his eyes cold as steel. "He must learn to be strong, to be a king. No one interferes, not even you, Elizabeth." He invoked their marriage vows, that he would raise their children a wall she couldn't breach. Elizabeth, though a queen, yielded to her husband's resolve, turning away with a heavy heart, knowing she had failed to protect her son. Charles's desperate days at Gordonstoun stretched on for 5 more years, each one a harsh lesson in suppressing emotion, hiding his heart. He learned that love was a luxury, tears a weakness, and a king could not be human. Those scars never healed, only deepened, shaping Charles into a man living behind a facade of duty, always feeling something was missing, a piece of himself. Now, sitting in his room at Clarence House, Charles stared into the void, his hands clenched on his lap, as if clinging to his last shred of strength. Camilla's words echoed in his mind, cold and cruel: a weak king, a hidden patient. He wondered if she was right. Was he truly a flawed product, a king who couldn't love, couldn't cry, couldn't live as a man? Memories of Gordonstoun, his parents' coldness, and his mother's letters flooded him, pulling him into darkness. He felt he stood at an abyss where every effort to be a perfect king seemed futile. But deep within, a faint light flickered, a spark of hope kindled by William, the son who saw his pain and vowed to fight for him. Charles thought of William, of his unwavering gaze and unconditional love. For the first time in years, he felt warmth, as if someone truly cared for the man beneath the crown. That spark, though fragile, made him wonder, could he find himself again, or was it too late to learn to love, to live as a man? William sat in a secluded room at Kensington Palace, the crystal chandelier's light illuminating his face, highlighting his steely, determined eyes. He refused to let emotion cloud his judgment, though his heart still burned from Camilla's betrayal. He knew that to protect his father, Kate, and the monarchy's future, He needed to act with a general's precision and cold resolve. Before him sat his three most trusted advisors, veterans, who had served under Queen Elizabeth II, sharp minds who had weathered decades of royal storms. They gathered around an oak table, their eyes focused, ready to execute the heir's commands. William stood, his voice low and resolute, each word carved from stone. "I won't destroy Camilla. That would only make her a martyr in the public's eyes. Instead, I'll make her what she fears most, a hollow symbol, a shadow without power." The advisors nodded, recognizing the brilliance in William's plan. This wasn't a war of swords or guns, it was a battle of intellect, honor, and truth. William's plan was laid out with chilling precision. First, he ordered his advisors to comb through Camilla's communications with external media groups. He suspected she had hired PR consultants to bolster her image, while spreading damaging rumors to dim Kate's light. Every message, email, or trace of this alliance needed to be collected like pieces of a damning puzzle. William knew Camilla, with her cunning, would cover her tracks well, but he believed no secret could stay hidden forever. Next, William demanded a review of the charitable funds Camilla managed. He suspected she had misused these funds, meant for good causes, to finance smear campaigns against Kate. A team of financial experts was summoned, quietly digging into transactions, searching for any irregularities. Every number, every line in the ledgers could be a bullet in William's arsenal. William also prepared for an emergency meeting with the Privy Council, the monarchy's most powerful oversight body. There he would present evidence and demand the stripping of Camilla's real authority. She would retain the title of Queen Consort, a nominal shell, to avoid public upheaval. But all privileges, from representing the monarchy to managing charitable funds, would be revoked. William knew this wasn't just a personal battle. It was a fight for the monarchy's honor, for truth, and for his father, a man who had lived too long in his own shadow, manipulated by those he trusted. William left the room, his gaze unwavering. He knew this plan demanded not just precision, but the heart of a son ready to stand for his family. In his chest, a fire smoldered, not of vengeance, but of justice. The night at Clarence House was shrouded in thick darkness, not a sliver of moonlight piercing the ancient stained glass windows, as if the sky itself held its breath for the storm of power about to erupt. The library, with its polished oak walls and towering bookshelves, exuded a cold grandeur, but the air inside was heavy, tense enough to cut with a knife. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows, as if the monarchy's history watched this pivotal moment. Camilla entered, her posture confident like a warrior stepping onto the battlefield. Her black silk dress hugged her frame, each step a declaration of power, her heels clicking on the wooden floor like a drumbeat heralding a merciless war. Her smile was sharp, brimming with pride, as if she held every card. But as her eyes met the scene before her, that smug smile faltered. Charles sat in the velvet armchair, his sunken eyes drained of life. Yet there was something different, a quiet resolve no longer marked by the submission she knew. Beside him stood William, tall and commanding, his broad shoulders radiating the presence of an heir ready to fight for his family's honor. On the ebony table between them lay a thick dossier, like a verdict awaiting pronouncement. The air was thick, as if time itself had paused, awaiting the unveiling of truth. William rose, his demeanor calm, but his eyes cold as steel, piercing through every layer of Camilla's carefully crafted facade. He spoke slowly, each word measured sharp as a honed blade. "You remain Queen Consort, but from now on you will no longer represent the monarchy at any events. No more media interactions, no more control over charitable funds, and you will not speak unless permitted." His voice was soft but struck like a hammer, shattering the power Camilla had built over decades. This wasn't a threat, it was a decree undeniable. Camilla laughed, a brittle, sharp sound like breaking glass, but her eyes betrayed the panic rising within, a crown without a voice. "How quaint, William," she said, clinging to her pride, her voice trembling slightly like a beast cornered. She turned to Charles, searching for an ally, a sign he was still the pliable man she had manipulated. But Charles sat still, his sunken eyes glinting with something new, not the weakness she had exploited, but a liberation, as if he had rediscovered a part of himself after years of suppression. William didn't acknowledge her smile. He slid the dossier toward her, the motion gentle but laden with power, like a general laying down the final card. "This is the evidence," he said, his voice still calm, but cutting. Messages, emails, copies of transfers from your charitable funds to a media company. They spread rumors against Kate on your orders. You went too far, Camilla. Each word was an arrow hitting its mark, exposing the truth Camilla had tried to hide. The messages she sent to PR consultants, the funds diverted to fuel smear articles against Kate. The emails plotting to dim the Princess of Hearts' light all lay in the dossier, meticulously organized, leaving no room for denial. Camilla's eyes scanned the dossier, her hands clenching, her crimson nails digging into her palms, leaving angry marks. The words numbers and undeniable evidence stared back like a death sentence. She wanted to protest, to scream that it was a conspiracy, that she was framed, but the truth was too clear, too cruel. The emails she thought she'd erased, the conversations she believed were secret, all were exposed as if the palace itself had betrayed her. Camilla, who prided herself on her cunning and control, realized she had been outmaneuvered by the very shrewdness she had underestimated in William. She looked up, a final spark of defiance in her eyes, but William didn't waver. He met her gaze, his eyes piercing through her defenses as if seeing her very soul. "You chose this path, Camilla," he said, his voice low but heavy. "You thought you could use secrets to manipulate my father to hurt my family. But you forgot one thing: this monarchy isn't just about power. It's about honor, and I will protect that honor at all costs." Charles sat silently, but for the first time he didn't bow to Camilla. His eyes held a new light, not the weakness she knew, but liberation. Silent tears rolled down his cheeks, not for the wife who had manipulated him for years, but for the realization that he had been freed from an invisible cage. William, the son he thought he didn't deserve, had stood up for him, for their family, for the truth. In that moment, Charles felt a freedom he had never known, the freedom to be a man, not just a king. Camilla turned, walking out of the room, her silhouette fading into the dark hallway. Her heels echoed, faint and forlorn, like a fading melody in the palace's silence. She wasn't dethroned, but her power had dissolved like mist in the sunlight. In that moment, Camilla knew she had lost not the throne, but the people who once stood by her. Her steps grew heavier, each one weighed by the truth that the crown on her head was now a hollow shell, devoid of power or meaning. Meanwhile, William and Charles remained in the room, father and son, silent, but their silence was filled with meaning, a new beginning, a promise of healing and unity. A week after the confrontation at Clarence House, William invited his father to the Windsor Library, a sacred place where ancient bookshelves held the monarchy's memories across centuries. The soft glow of wall sconces illuminated leather-bound volumes, creating a space both warm and solemn, as if history itself watched the father and son. Charles entered, his weary frame stooped as if carrying the weight of the monarchy. William stood there, his gaze gentle but resolute, like a son ready to face his father's deepest wounds. William quietly placed an unopened envelope before Charles. Queen Elizabeth II's elegant script, clear on the yellowed paper. "I found this in grandmother's archives." William said, his voice low and gentle, but carrying undeniable weight. "I think you should read it." Charles trembled as he touched the envelope, his fingers tracing his mother's familiar handwriting, as if touching a forgotten memory. He opened it, pulling out a short letter written in Elizabeth's hand, smooth but laden with pain. "If you're reading this, I'm no longer here. I'm sorry, Charles, for making you a king before you could be a child. I was wrong to let Philip send you to Gordonstown. I was wrong not to hold you more, not to listen more. Forgive me, my son." Charles read each line, his eyes clouding with tears. He folded the letter, his hands shaking as if clinging to the final piece of his heart. And then, for the first time in his 74 years behind a cold royal facade, Charles wept. Tears streamed down his weathered face, washing away the pain he had buried. The freezing nights at Gordonstown, the taunts for his weakness, the decades of loneliness no one understood. His sobs were quiet but echoed in the still room, a release for his soul. William said nothing. He simply sat beside his father, not hugging, not consoling, but present as a true son, letting Charles be his true self. In that moment, they were no longer king and heir, but a father and son bound by honesty and shared pain. William knew this wasn't just his father's liberation. It was the first step toward healing the wounds the monarchy had borne too long. The following March, England turned its eyes to their screens. where King Charles III appeared in a special broadcast titled Psychology and Succession. The studio was simple, unadorned, but the air was heavy with anticipation. Charles sat there not in lavish royal regalia, but in a plain suit like an ordinary man ready to share his life story. Before millions, he began his voice low and trembling, but filled with the power of truth. I once thought a king wasn't allowed to cry, he said, his eyes glinting with unhidden tears. I grew up in a world where emotions were seen as weakness, where a prince couldn't be a child. At Gordonstown, I spent nights on a bed soaked by rain, through an open window, days mocked for wanting to be loved. I learned to hide my heart, believing that was how to be a king. The nation fell silent. Charles continued, his voice breaking, but unwavering. But today I stand here not just as a king, but as a man, a father, a husband, and someone who needs love. I lived too long behind a facade, but thanks to my son William, I've learned that true strength isn't in hiding emotions, but in facing them. Charles's tears fell freely, unashamed, unhidden. They were not just personal liberation, but a symbol of a new monarchy, one where emotions were no longer weakness, but a source of strength to connect with people. Across England, from rural cottages to London flats, viewers wiped tears, feeling a profound shift in how they saw their king. Camilla, now living quietly at Highgrove House, no longer appeared in public. She retained the title of Queen Consort, but it was an empty name devoid of power or influence. No one spoke her name outside mandatory ceremonies, and she became a shadow, just as William had declared. In her isolated home, Camilla sat by a window, staring at the still garden, her eyes empty, facing the truth that the power she craved had vanished, leaving an unfillable void. Kate, whom Camilla had demanded step back now, rose as the symbol of a new royal generation. With her radiant smile and compassionate heart, she captured the public's love, not just through beauty, but through sincerity and empathy. She appeared at charity events, held children's hands, listened to people's stories, and brought a warmer, more human monarchy. Kate wasn't just the Princess of Hearts, she was the embodiment of hope, renewal, and a brighter future for the crown. In a speech at Buckingham Palace, William stood before a crowd, his eyes blazing with conviction and pride. True power isn't in how many you control, he said, his voice echoing in the silent hall. It's in whether you'd give it up to save one, a father, a mother, or a partner. That's what makes a king. The room erupted in applause, affirming William's vision. And somewhere in the shadows of Highgrove House, Camilla sat silently, her gaze fixed on the quiet garden. She knew she had lost not just power, but the hearts of those who once stood by her. Meanwhile, Charles, William, and Kate found strength and sincerity, love, in the courage to face themselves. How does it feel to witness Charles's profound vulnerability and William's fierce resolve to protect his family? Does this tale of loyalty and betrayal make you reflect on the value of family bonds in the face of harsh circumstances?